Daniel, what are you doing? The entire wedding hall went silent. Ava stood frozen in the aisle, staring at the man she had been married to for 3 years, standing at the altar as another woman's groom. Tell them who I am, Daniel. Ava's voice trembled as she stood in the middle of the wedding aisle. But the real shock came when he looked straight at her and said, I'm sorry. I don't know this woman. Welcome to True Love Stories, where we share interesting and intriguing stories. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do not forget to like and share. Now let's dive into the story. Ava Thompson had always believed that love required patience, loyalty, and sacrifice. Those were values she carried proudly into her marriage with Daniel Carter, the man she once believed was her greatest blessing. At 31, Ava was known for her quiet elegance and warm spirit. With deep brown skin that glowed softly under the light, expressive almond-shaped eyes, and long waves hair usually styled into neat braids, she carried herself with a calm confidence that made people trust her instantly. For 3 years, she had built a life with Daniel, cooking dinners together in their modest apartment, attending family gatherings with his relatives, and dreaming about the future they would build side by side. That afternoon, Ava Thompson had not planned to see Daniel at all. In fact, Daniel had assumed she would be staying home that day. He had left early in the morning after mentioning that he would be busy with work meetings across town, sounding unusually calm and unconcerned about her schedule. What he didn't know was that Ava had her own plans. For the past few months, Ava had quietly been developing a small consulting project of her own, helping a local entrepreneur organize financial documents for a new business venture. That afternoon, she was scheduled to meet the woman at the Royal Crest Hotel to discuss the final details of their partnership. The Royal Crest Hotel was known as one of the most luxurious venues in the city. Its grand entrance was framed by tall glass doors and polished marble pillars, while inside, golden chandeliers shimmered above an expansive lobby that smelled faintly of roses and polished wood. Ava walked through the lobby with a small smile, the folder tucked neatly under her arm. As she approached the reception desk, soft music drifted through the air. It sounded like a violin ensemble playing somewhere deeper inside the building. Ava assumed the hotel was hosting a formal event, which wasn't unusual for a place like the Royal Crest. Curious, she followed the sound of the music down a long hallway decorated with tall arrangements of white roses and gold ribbon. The atmosphere felt unusually festive. Elegant guests in expensive clothing moved past her, laughing quietly and carrying champagne glasses. Ava slowed her steps as she reached the large ballroom doors. They were slightly open, allowing warm golden light to spill into the hallway. The music grew louder, and the faint voice of a wedding officiant echoed inside. A wedding. She hesitated for a moment, but stepped forward anyway, thinking perhaps the meeting had something to do with the event. Gently pushing the door open, Ava slipped quietly into the back of the ballroom. The sight inside was breathtaking. Rows of white chairs lined a long aisle covered in rose petals, while crystal chandeliers sparkled above a sea of elegantly dressed guests. A towering arrangement of white orchids framed the altar at the front of the room. Everything about the ceremony screamed wealth, beauty, and celebration. But Ava's eyes weren't focused on the decorations. They were locked on the man standing at the end of the aisle. Her husband, Daniel Carter, stood tall near the altar, dressed in a perfectly fitted black tuxedo that hugged his broad shoulders. His dark skin glowed under the chandelier lights, and his neatly trimmed beard and low-fade haircut gave him the polished look she had always admired. He looked calm, confident, almost proud, and beside him stood a woman in a breathtaking designer wedding gown. The bride's dress shimmered with delicate crystals that caught the light with every small movement. Her dark skin had a radiant glow, and her hair was styled into an elegant updo crowned with a diamond tiara. Around her neck rested a necklace that looked expensive enough to buy a small house. She held a bouquet of white roses as she smiled softly at Daniel. Ava felt the world tilt. Her heart began pounding violently in her chest as confusion crashed through her mind. Why was Daniel standing at an altar? Why was he dressed like a groom? And why was there another woman standing beside him? For several long seconds, Ava could not move. Her fingers tightened slowly around the folder she was holding as her eyes desperately searched the crowd for some explanation. Then she saw them. Seated proudly in the front row were Daniel's parents. His mother wore a glittering emerald dress and a wide smile. His father sat beside her in a tailored gray suit, nodding approvingly as the ceremony continued. Next to them sat Daniel's younger sister and several cousins. The same people who had spent Christmas with Ava. The same people who had called her family. They were smiling, clapping softly, celebrating. Not one of them looked surprised. Not one of them looked guilty. It was as if Ava had never existed. The realization slammed into her chest so violently that it stole the air from her lungs. Her husband was getting married, and his entire family was there, watching, supporting him, while she, the woman who had shared his bed, cooked his meals, and believed in his love, stood alone at the back of the room like a stranger who had wandered into the wrong life. Ava's legs trembled as the truth slowly formed in her mind. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a business event. This wasn't some strange coincidence. Daniel Carter, the man she had loved for 3 years, was standing at the altar preparing to marry another woman. And everyone in the room already knew. Except her. For several long seconds, Ava Thompson could not move. The ballroom seemed to spin slowly around her as the horrifying truth settled into her chest like a stone. Her ears rang faintly, drowning out the soft violin music that continued playing near the altar. Guests were smiling, whispering, and leaning toward one another as they watched the beautiful ceremony unfold. None of them noticed the woman standing frozen at the back of the room whose entire world had just shattered. Her husband was about to marry another woman. Ava's fingers slowly loosened around the folder she had been holding. The papers slipped from her grasp and scattered across the polished marble floor, but she barely noticed. Her heart pounded violently in her chest as heat rose behind her eyes. Every memory of the past 3 years flashed through her mind like a cruel joke. The nights Daniel had held her and promised forever, the dinners with his parents where they called her daughter, the quiet mornings when he kissed her forehead before leaving for work. All of it had been a lie. Her breathing became uneven as something inside her snapped. Before she could stop herself, Ava began walking down the aisle. Her heels struck the marble floor with sharp echoes that slowly began to draw attention. A few guests turned in confusion as she passed them. Murmurs spread through the room as people noticed the woman moving steadily toward the altar, her face pale with disbelief and rage. The music faltered. The violinists looked uncertain as Ava continued forward. Daniel had not noticed her yet. His attention was still on the officiant, who was calmly speaking about love, loyalty, and the sacred bond of marriage. The words felt like knives in Ava's chest. She stopped halfway down the aisle, her voice trembling as she shouted the name she had spoken with love for 3 years. Daniel! The entire ballroom fell silent. Daniel Carter slowly turned his head. For a brief second, genuine shock flashed across his face. His eyes widened slightly as he saw the woman standing in the aisle. Ava knew that look well. It was the expression he made when something unexpected caught him off guard. Their eyes locked. For one fragile moment, Ava thought he might run toward her. She thought he might stop the ceremony and explain that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But that moment disappeared almost instantly. Daniel's expression hardened. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, distant calm that Ava had never seen before. Beside him, the bride frowned slightly, her perfectly shaped brows pulling together in confusion. She glanced between Ava and Daniel. "Daniel," the bride asked quietly, "who is that?" Ava's chest rose and fell rapidly as she stepped closer to the altar. Tears were already spilling down her cheeks, but her voice remained strong enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Tell them," she said, pointing at him with a shaking hand. "Tell them who I am." Guests leaned toward one another, whispering nervously. Cameras from a few curious attendees slowly lifted into the air as people sensed that something dramatic was unfolding. Ava's voice cracked as she continued. "Daniel, tell them I'm your wife." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. The bride's eyes widened as she turned fully toward Daniel. "What is she talking about?" Daniel remained silent for a moment. He slowly exhaled, running a hand down the front of his tuxedo as if irritated by the interruption. Then he shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "I don't know this woman." The words struck Ava harder than any slap. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. "What?" she whispered. The The bride's confusion quickly turned into visible irritation as she crossed her arms. "You don't know her?" she asked sharply. Daniel's face remained composed as he looked toward the guests, then back at Ava with a faint expression of annoyance. "No," he said firmly. "I've never seen her before." Ava stared at him in disbelief. Her tears fell faster now as her entire body trembled. "Daniel, stop it," she cried. "What are you doing? This isn't funny. Tell them the truth." Before Daniel could respond, his mother suddenly stood up from the front row. The elegant woman walked forward with an exaggerated sigh of embarrassment, placing a gentle hand over her chest as she addressed the guests. "I'm terribly sorry about this," she said loudly. "This woman is Daniel's ex-wife." The lie echoed through the ballroom. Ava's head snapped toward her. "What are you saying?" she cried. "You were at my house last week. You called me your daughter." But Daniel's mother only shook her head sadly, as if dealing with a difficult child. "She has been struggling since the divorce," she continued. "We tried to help her, truly we did, but she refuses to accept that the marriage ended." Daniel's father stood up beside her, his deep voice firm and cold. "She has mental health problems," he said. "We've warned her many times not to show up and cause scenes like this." The whispers in the room grew louder. Guests began looking at Ava with pity. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked amused. The humiliation wrapped around Ava like a tightening rope. "These people are lying," she shouted desperately. "Daniel, look at me. Tell them the truth." But Daniel didn't move. He didn't comfort her. He didn't defend her. Instead, he looked toward the back of the ballroom. "Security," he said sharply. Two large guards began walking down the aisle. Ava's heart broke completely in that moment. The man she had loved, the family she had trusted, had just erased her existence in front of hundreds of strangers. As the guards reached her and grabbed her arms, Ava struggled through her tears. "You can't do this," she screamed. "Daniel, please." But he had already turned away from her, as if she no longer existed. The guards dragged her toward the doors while the shocked crowd watched in silence. Just before she was pushed out of the ballroom, Ava turned back one last time. Her voice echoed through the room. "You will regret this," she cried, her tears streaming down her face. "Every single one of you." The doors slammed shut. Inside, the music slowly began again. And the wedding continued. But outside the ballroom, standing alone in the hallway with her heart shattered into pieces, Ava Thompson made a silent promise to herself. They had humiliated her. They had erased her. They had called her crazy. But one day soon, she would make sure the entire world knew the truth. And when that day came, they would lose everything they were trying so desperately to protect. The grand doors of the ballroom slammed shut behind Ava, the echo ringing through the quiet hallway like a final judgment. For a moment she simply stood there, frozen, her chest rising and falling as if the air itself had turned heavy. The soft violin music from inside the wedding hall continued faintly through the thick doors, a cruel reminder that the ceremony had continued as if nothing had happened, as if she had never existed. Her legs trembled beneath her, and she stumbled backward until her shoulders touched the cold marble wall. The humiliation she had just endured replayed in her mind again and again. Daniel's cold voice denying her, his mother calling her mentally unstable, the strangers staring at her like she was some pathetic intruder. 3 years of marriage had just been erased in less than 5 minutes. Tears blurred her vision as she slowly sank onto a bench in the hallway. Her fingers curled tightly against the fabric of her blouse as anger and heartbreak twisted painfully inside her chest. She had loved that man, truly loved him. She had defended him when people doubted him, supported his struggling business, and believed every promise he had made about building a future together. And now he had stood before hundreds of people and pretended he had never even met her. A few minutes later, 2 hotel staff members approached cautiously, their expressions uncomfortable. One of them held the papers that had fallen from Ava's hands earlier. "Ma'am," the woman said softly, handing the documents to her. "You should probably leave the building." Ava nodded slowly, too exhausted to argue. She wiped her face with trembling fingers and stood up, walking quietly through the lobby and out the revolving glass doors. Outside, the sky had darkened. A cold rain had begun to fall, tapping softly against the pavement and the glowing streetlights surrounding the hotel. The The once glamorous building behind her now looked like a fortress that had just thrown her out. Ava stepped into the rain without caring that her clothes were getting soaked. Her curls quickly became damp as the water ran down her face, mixing with the tears she could no longer stop. She walked aimlessly down the sidewalk, her mind numb with disbelief. How long had Daniel been planning this? How long had his family known? Every laugh they had shared with her now felt like a mockery. Every kind word from his mother, every friendly conversation with his father, every hug from his sister. It had all been part of a lie. The betrayal was almost too much to hold. After several minutes, Ava reached a small park across the street from the hotel. She sat heavily on a wooden bench beneath a large tree, the rain dripping through the leaves above her. Her phone vibrated suddenly inside her purse. At first she ignored it, assuming it might be Daniel calling to threaten her or demand that she stay silent. But when the phone buzzed again, curiosity forced her to pull it out. The message was from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. The words on the screen made her heart skip. If you want to know why your husband betrayed you today, meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. Below the message was an address. Ava stared at the screen for several seconds, her mind racing with suspicion. It could be a trap. It could be someone trying to mock her further. But something inside her told her that the answer to everything that had just happened might lie behind that message. The next morning, Ava arrived at the address. It was a quiet cafe tucked into a corner of downtown, far away from the luxury and attention of the Royal Crest Hotel. The warm smell of coffee and baked bread filled the air as she stepped inside. Her eyes scanned the room until she noticed a man sitting alone near the window. He appeared to be in his late 50s, with deep brown skin and neatly combed salt and pepper hair. His posture was straight and dignified, and he wore a well-tailored charcoal suit that suggested both wealth and discipline. A pair of thin glasses rested on his nose as he calmly stirred his coffee. When he noticed Ava approaching, he stood politely. "You must be Ava Thompson," he said. Ava nodded cautiously. "You're the one who sent the message?" The man gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please sit. My name is Harold Wallace." Ava frowned slightly as she took the seat. The name sounded familiar. After a moment, she remembered. Wallace. Daniel mentioned a business partner with that name once. A faint, bitter smile crossed the man's face. "Yes," he said quietly. "I used to be his business partner." Ava leaned forward slightly. "Why did you contact me?" Mr. Wallace studied her for a moment, as if weighing how much to say. Finally, he reached into the briefcase beside his chair and pulled out a thick folder. "I watched what happened at that wedding yesterday," he said calmly. "And I believe you deserve to know the truth." He slid the folder across the table. Ava slowly opened it. Inside were financial records, printed emails, business contracts, and bank transfers. Some of the documents had Daniel's signature on them. Her eyes moved quickly across the pages, confusion turning into shock. "What is this?" she asked. Mr. Wallace leaned back in his chair. "Your husband did not marry that woman for love," he said. Ava's fingers tightened around the papers. "Then why?" Mr. Wallace's voice remained calm, but his words were sharp. "Money." He folded his hands together. "The woman he married yesterday is Victoria Kingston, the only daughter of Robert Kingston, one of the wealthiest real estate developers in the country." Ava's stomach dropped. The entire marriage was arranged to give Daniel access to the Kingston family's business empire, Mr. Wallace continued. With that connection, he could expand his company overnight. Ava stared at him, disbelief flooding her face. "But he's already married." Mr. Wallace nodded slowly. "That's exactly the problem." He tapped the folder. "Daniel and his family needed a way to erase you." The cafe suddenly felt colder. "They planned to destroy your reputation," he continued. "If anyone questioned the legality of the new marriage, they would claim you were a mentally unstable ex-wife who refused to accept the divorce." Ava felt her hands begin to shake. "So everything they said yesterday was part of the plan," Mr. Wallace finished. Silence hung between them for several seconds. Then Ava looked down again at the documents inside the folder. "What does all this have to do with me?" Mr. Wallace's expression became serious. "These are records of Daniel's illegal financial activities. Fraud, hidden transactions, bribery." He leaned forward slightly. "If these documents reach the right authorities, Daniel Carter and the Kingston family could lose everything. Ava slowly closed the folder. The heartbreak inside her chest had not disappeared. But something else had begun to grow beside it. Strength. For the first time since the wedding, Ava lifted her head with determination in her eyes. "They humiliated me," she said quietly. Mr. Wallace nodded. "They erased me." Another nod. Ava's voice became calm. "Then I guess it's time the world learned who they really are." Mr. Wallace leaned back in his chair and studied her carefully. For the first time since the disastrous wedding, a faint smile appeared on his face. "Good," he said, because the people who had laughed while throwing her out of that ballroom had no idea what they had just created. They believed Ava Thompson was broken. But what they had actually done was awaken the woman who would destroy them. The days following Ava's meeting with Harold Wallace changed everything. For the first time since the humiliating wedding, Ava no longer felt powerless. The pain was still there, sitting heavy in her chest whenever she remembered Daniel's cold denial or the way his family had looked at her like she was nothing. But now that pain had direction. It had purpose. She wasn't going to scream or beg anymore. She was going to expose them. Over the next few weeks, Ava and Mr. Wallace met quietly several times in his downtown office, a sleek glass building overlooking the city. The office walls were lined with shelves of legal documents and business awards, evidence of the empire Mr. Wallace had once built before Daniel's greed destroyed their partnership. Ava spent hours reviewing the documents inside the folder he had given her. Bank statements revealed millions of dollars moving through hidden accounts. Contracts showed Daniel manipulating investors with false promises. Emails exposed secret meetings with powerful figures who helped him secure deals that were anything but legal. The deeper Ava looked, the more she realized something chilling. Daniel had never been the honest businessman he pretended to be. He had been building his success through deception for years. And the marriage to Victoria Kingston was the final step in his plan to climb into the elite world of billionaire wealth. But Daniel had made one fatal mistake. He believed Ava was weak. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall buildings outside Mr. Wallace's office window, Ava placed another stack of documents on the desk. "This one," she said quietly, pointing to a page. "It proves Daniel transferred money through 3 different companies before it ended up in the Kingston Development account." Mr. Wallace studied the document carefully and nodded with approval. "You're learning quickly." Ava gave a small, bitter smile. "I had to." He leaned back in his chair. "You understand what happens once we release this information, don't you?" "Yes," Ava replied calmly. "It will destroy them." Ava didn't hesitate. "They destroyed me first." Mr. Wallace watched her for a moment, noticing how different she looked now compared to the broken woman who had sat across from him in the cafe. Her posture was straighter. Her eyes were sharper. The quiet kindness she once carried had been replaced by something stronger. Resolve. The plan moved forward carefully. Instead of attacking immediately, Mr. Wallace arranged for the evidence to reach the right places. Financial investigators, journalists known for exposing corporate scandals, and regulatory agencies that specialized in uncovering fraud. Within a few weeks, the first crack appeared. One morning, Ava was sitting in her apartment when her phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart skipped as she opened the headline. Major real estate corporation under investigation for financial irregularities. The article mentioned the Kingston family's company. Ava sat back slowly, reading every word. The investigation was only beginning. But the storm had started. Over the next several days, more information leaked. Journalists began asking questions about unusual transactions connected to Daniel Carter's company. Financial regulators started digging into business deals tied to the Kingston development projects. And then the biggest story broke. New evidence suggests Groom and Kingston wedding was already married. The scandal exploded across media outlets. Television reporters discussed it during evening broadcasts. Social media flooded with debates and speculation. People who had once admired Daniel's rapid rise in the business world were now questioning everything about him. At the Kingston mansion, the atmosphere turned tense. Victoria Kingston had initially dismissed the rumors as jealous attacks against her husband's success. But as more evidence appeared, her patience began to crack. One evening she stormed into Daniel's private office, her designer heels striking the marble floor with sharp, angry echoes. "Tell me this isn't true," she demanded, throwing a printed news article onto his desk. Daniel glanced at the headline and felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Victoria, these accusations are ridiculous," he said calmly. But she wasn't convinced. "They're saying you were already married when you married me." Daniel forced a laugh. That woman was just a crazy ex-wife trying to cause trouble. Victoria studied him carefully. "Then why are investigators looking into your financial records?" Daniel had no answer. Meanwhile, the Kingston family patriarch, Robert Kingston, was furious. The scandal threatened decades of carefully built reputation and power. Investigators soon discovered something even worse. Millions of dollars connected to Daniel's company had been funneled through Kingston development projects. Now the authorities wanted answers. Within days, Daniel's office was raided. Computers were seized. Accounts were frozen. News cameras gathered outside the Kingston corporate headquarters as reporters demanded statements. Daniel Carter, once praised as a rising business star, suddenly became the center of a growing scandal. But the final blow came one quiet afternoon. Daniel arrived at his office building only to find security guards waiting at the entrance. "You can't go inside, sir," one of them said. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "The board has suspended your access pending investigation." For the first time since the wedding, real fear appeared in Daniel's eyes. Everything he had built, the wealth, the power, the connections, was collapsing faster than he could stop it. And somewhere across the city, Ava Thompson sat quietly in her apartment, watching the news report on television. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She simply watched as the empire Daniel and his family had protected so fiercely began to crumble piece by piece. They had thrown her out of a wedding like she was nothing. Now the truth was throwing them out of the world they had fought so hard to control. The scandal spread through the city like wildfire. Within weeks, the name Daniel Carter, once associated with ambition and rising success, became a symbol of greed and deception. News channels replayed the story repeatedly, each report revealing more details about the fraudulent business deals, the hidden accounts, and the shocking truth about his illegal second marriage. Investigators dug deeper into the financial records Ava and Mr. Wallace had provided. What they uncovered only made the situation worse. The Kingston family's real estate company, which had been admired for decades, was now under intense scrutiny from regulators and investors alike. Several development projects were halted overnight, and the company's stock value began to collapse. Inside the Kingston mansion, the atmosphere had turned from celebration to chaos. Victoria Kingston sat in the massive living room staring at the television screen as reporters discussed the scandal surrounding her husband. Her once perfect wedding now looked like a public disaster. Friends stopped calling, business partners refused to meet with her father, and the media surrounded their home day and night. Finally, Victoria turned toward Daniel, who stood near the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Was any of it real?" she asked coldly. Daniel said nothing. The silence was enough. Victoria's voice trembled with fury. "You married me for money." Daniel tried to speak. "Victoria, I can explain." "You don't need to," she cut him off. "My lawyers will handle the divorce." Within a month, the Kingston family publicly announced the annulment of the marriage, claiming they had been deceived by Daniel's lies. To protect their reputation, they quickly distanced themselves from him, leaving him to face the growing legal consequences alone. Daniel's world collapsed rapidly after that. His company declared bankruptcy. Former investors filed lawsuits demanding their money back. The media continued exposing more of his illegal dealings, and eventually the authorities issued a formal charge against him for fraud and bigamy. The man who had once stood proudly at the altar in a designer tuxedo now found himself sitting in a cold courtroom, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras. But the biggest humiliation came when he realized something else. Ava Thompson had been the one behind it all, not through revengeful shouting or public drama, but through truth. The evidence she had helped uncover had dismantled everything he had built on lies. One evening, months after the scandal had erupted, Daniel appeared outside Ava's apartment building. He looked nothing like the confident groom who had denied her existence at the wedding. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by simple clothes. Dark circles hung under his tired eyes, and the arrogance that once defined him had vanished. When Ava opened the door and saw him standing there, she felt no anger. Only distance. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ava, please," he said quietly. "We need to talk." She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "What is there to talk about?" she asked calmly. Daniel rubbed his face with shaking hands. "You've ruined my life," he said. Ava studied him for a moment before answering. "No," she replied softly. "You ruined it yourself." He looked at her helplessly. "Everything is gone. My company, my reputation, even my family has turned against me." Ava's voice remained steady. "That's what happens when the truth finally catches up with lies." Daniel lowered his head. "Ava, I was desperate. I thought marrying Victoria would solve everything. I never thought things would go this far." She looked at him with quiet clarity. "You didn't think because you never cared who got hurt." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. After a long silence, Ava turned and walked back toward her door. But before going inside, she spoke one final time. "The day you stood at that altar and pretended you didn't know me, that was the moment you lost everything." Then she stepped inside and closed the door. Months later, the city had mostly moved on from the scandal. Daniel Carter was awaiting trial, his once powerful life reduced to court hearings and legal battles. But Ava's life had taken a very different direction. With Mr. Wallace's support and guidance, she had begun helping manage several of the legitimate businesses that had once been part of their partnership. Her intelligence, honesty, and resilience quickly earned the respect of investors and colleagues. One bright afternoon, Ava stood inside a modern office building overlooking the city skyline. The sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, reflecting across the polished floors. Behind her, a newly installed company sign read, "Thompson and Wallace Enterprises." Employees moved through the office confidently, discussing projects and plans for expansion. What had started as a painful chapter in Ava's life had quietly become the foundation for a new beginning. Mr. Wallace walked up beside her, smiling slightly as he looked out over the city. "You've come a long way," he said. Ava nodded. "Yes," she replied softly. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon where the sun slowly dipped behind the tall buildings, casting warm golden light across the skyline. For the first time since that terrible wedding day, Ava felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. She hadn't destroyed Daniel's life out of hatred. She had simply revealed the truth. And the truth had done what it always does. It had set her free. Finally, we have come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Do well to like and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories.